Hello everyone, we're going to make a start now with the next session. And it's a real pleasure to chair this one as part of the network. We've had this opportunity to make small investments in exciting projects that can generate some rich new insights, and it's great to have two of those projects represented in this next panel. So we're going to take a closer look at these projects that have received grants from the Queer Heritage and Collections Network. They demonstrate a rich diversity of queer practice. We looked for a range of different practices across the projects that applied, but they also challenged the network to consider what we might do next and how we might foster innovation and new thinking in different areas. So we have two speakers. Our first is Sophie Meyer, whose pronouns are she, her, and Sophie is from Queer Kernow, founder and director of that organisation, and also a trustee of Cornwall Pride. Sophie has a degree in archaeology and a master's degree in Roman archaeology from Southampton University. Sophie's worked in heritage for over 10 years and has moved through the ranks of some of Cornwall's best known heritage organisations. So I'm reliably told Sophie is joining us online, so you can get ready, Sophie. Hopefully you can hear me. You're going to share, I think, some of your work from Queer Kernow, a non-profit community project based in the heart of Cornwall, and a recent collaboration with the Cornwall Records Office. So, hi Sophie, it's brilliant to see you. We can see you on screen, and I think you're good to go when you're ready.
Cool. Okay, I will be quick, I promise. So I am director of Queer Kernow CIC, and Kernow is Cornish for Cornwall. Not many people know, but Cornwall actually has a national minority identity status, and working down here is really interesting, working kind of local Cornish community when people consider Cornwall is more of basically a tourist attraction. So I very much try and embed the work I do with the community down here. So the project I did was with Kernow, which is the County Records Office for Cornwall. And I worked with them on, well, they came to me with a collection that was, they found unaccessioned, just a massive box of these Outback newsletter booklets, and there was 128 issues of this self-published grassroots newsletter that started in 1996 and finished in 2008. So this newsletter was for lesbians in Cornwall and the far southwest, and it was with a kind of conglomerate of funding from the Queer Heritage Collection itself and the Cornwall Museum's partnership. I was able to not only look through this collection, but also do some outreach and some digital stuff as well with that. And what I find really interesting is that newsletters from the kind of 90s, well, and a bit earlier, were really significant to the queer community. We couldn't really get anything published in mainstream newspapers, and it was just really important as a way of connecting with one another and organising. And the themes of support and events and activism are the kind of three main themes that run throughout the issues of the Outback. So I started off by just reading every single issue. And I was lucky enough to work with a student from Exeter University who was doing a module on public history, who also gave me a hand on it. So that was really interesting. And alongside me cataloguing the collection with my intern, we worked with the workers at Kernow and just kind of shared how we would tag things for an LGBTQ plus audience in a way that wasn't reductive or relying on really offensive language that you get in archives of queer history. And so alongside with cataloguing this collection, it was really interesting to do that work with the staff at Kernow. And this led to me giving a talk on queering the archives for LGBT History Month last year, and also working with the staff at Kernow to create an LGBTQ plus research guide for their online collections. Crescent Kernow have millions of their things digitized, and it was really interesting to help them work out how to re-tag and create positive and not offensive search terms for LGBT history, which if you've worked in an archive or even a museum, even if there is a tag, usually it's using the historical language, or it's from a court case document with you know, a word that is not appropriate just for the general public to be searching in an online collection. So back to the Outback collection, when I'd gone through all kind of 128 issues, what we really wanted to do was then take this collection and share it with the community. It had been a collection that had been deposited at Crescent Kernow in 2008 and hadn't been looked at until 2022. It hadn't been accessioned, the box hadn't been opened. So after I'd read through it and catalogued everything, we had a really fun public programming kind of theme for LGBT History Month last year. And we connected with the local community and we ran a free workshop on the collection. And this was a great first step, both for Crescent Kernow and the LGBT community, of kind of bridging the gap and bringing the two together. Everyone who came to my workshop hadn't been to Crescent Kernow before, and Crescent Kernow hadn't done an LGBTQ plus project before. So it was great to marry those two together. And in the workshop, we did a general kind of introduction and look around the stores. And then we also thought about the themes that were coming out of the Outback collection, like I said, activism, events, and community and support, and created our own zines in response to this. I love doing a kind of twofold workshop where it's a bit of learning and then some creative action in the afternoon. And these are some of the zines that we created in that workshop. And then for LGBT History Month, we had a pop-up exhibition in the downstairs of the archive, which has a cafe and it's open to the public. You don't have to book to go in. And that was really impactful, just to show this collection that had been kind of sitting there and not really doing anything, and not really known about either. And then we also had it superimposed with the modern responses. So there was the historical issues of the Outback coupled with what we'd created in the workshop. And it was really interesting to tease out the themes of what are the things that people were thinking about when you say, you know, make a zine of some activism or events. What's your response and how does that compare to what was done in the 90s, say? And that was really great. And having that physical presence really helped get the word out about the project. And the missing link that was in this project was the actual creators. And when I started this project of cataloguing, because I'm a trustee of Cornwall Pride, I was fortunate enough to use their social media and their meetup events to talk about Outback, to take along some issues and share them, and try and find anyone who was still around in Cornwall who was a writer, a contributor, an editor, or a subscriber of Outback. And I was lucky enough to find some people willing to chat to me about their experience of being involved with the Outback magazine. This is Arian, Merv, and AJ. And I was able to meet with them, have coffee and chat, and really teased out their oral histories. And we did a formal oral histories recording as well about their experiences, both writing for the Outback newsletter, but then also so much more. They've been around in Cornwall since kind of pre-decriminalisation and onwards, and it was great to understand the reasoning behind writing this newsletter, and also tease out why it didn't have a strong presence in the kind of cultural mindset of the queer community down in Cornwall. It seemed to have been a little bit forgotten, and what came out of this discussion with these women was that they felt very disconnected from the LGBTQ plus community, the kind of community that goes to prides and has events, and I think that's hard in Cornwall because we are so rurally isolated. You do get pockets of loneliness, and that's something that we're really trying to fight against in Cornwall Pride. So actually, by marrying together, being involved with Cornwall Pride, in this picture here is Matt, who is the CEO of Cornwall Pride, with the work of Queer Kernow and meeting with these women. It was fantastic to be able to see how that could change the future of how we do Pride and how we connect with the community, because these women didn't feel connected and didn't feel part of it. And they actually said that pre-internet, with the Outback, that was their way of organising, and they didn't really know how to or where to go nowadays. So what was really nice is one of the women we spoke to was the artist involved with the Outback magazine, and we asked her to recreate a cover for us for Cornwall Pride's Pride season this summer. And that was a really lovely kind of marrying of the history and importance of this early newsletter, and making this community of older lesbians who felt a little bit left behind connected again with the modern Pride community. So another facet of this that we did is that a couple of students from Falmouth University Film Studies came to my zine workshop earlier at Kernow, and they were inspired enough to say would they be able to create a documentary about the collection for their coursework. So I was lucky enough to pair them together with a couple of the creators of the Outback magazine and say, let's just do a documentary about them and leading into the Outback and how important that is. Really fantastic to bridge that gap between the younger generation and the older generation, and also have a piece of video that now sits online and is also accessioned into the collection of Kernow as well, sitting alongside the Outback materials. So in addition to having this connection with Arian, Merv and AJ, they were able to donate a lot of missing material from that collection and really enriched it. So we collected the missing sets of Outback to create a complete set of 150 issues. They had a lot of videos that are now digitized of the cabarets and the pantomimes and the AIDS benefits that went on in Cornwall that are referenced in the Outback. We now have those digitized to go alongside the collection. We also have digital recordings of the lesbian band, which is another feature in the Outback that you read about, and it's so lovely to have that sound recorded, and all of this has been accessioned into Kernow's collection, sitting alongside those original 128 issues. So that's so what I have done with this is kind of collated all these different bits and put it into an online exhibition on the Queer Kernow website. This is I tend to see the work on and we've put up and we digitize more as we add more to the collections and the document on our website and coming on the Kernow website as well. So just really quickly, the legacy of projects. One of the things I wasn't expecting is really bringing together those greater links between the disparate factions of the LGBTQ plus community. Being able to speak to some older lesbian women who were so integral in the making of Outback and finding out what were their barriers to and how could Pride better serve them was really important. And it was great also to foster the kind of communication and interworking within our community. I'm really pleased to say that further oral history work, including training of some of the Cornwall Pride staff and some of the Queer Kernow staff, is going on to deliver more recordings. What's great is that after we did the 3 oral histories, the women shared it round with their connections, and all of a sudden we're inundated with people saying, oh, I've got something to say, I've got stuff that you might be interested in. And that's fantastic to really connect with that. And it's great for Crescent Kernow. We have an ongoing repository agreement with them for any continuing work in this. From a Crescent Kernow perspective, we now have a collections guide on their website for how to search LGBTQ+ collections. We changed their understanding of tagging, and they now have a clear set of guidelines for how to kind of go through their collection and take away those harmful words that you find tags when you're researching. The online exhibition will stay up on my website, Queer Kernow, and it will be constantly growing as we do things. And what's really fun actually is that we are returning the cabarets, which is some of the support events that happened in the Outback newsletters every year since, I think, 1980 up until 2005. They had a fundraising cabaret for AIDS awareness. And being able to chat about that with the community and with Cornwall Pride, we are very excitingly going to bring that back at the same place that it took place in the 80s and 90s. So I hope I kept to 15 minutes. That was really quick. Thank you. And I'm really sorry about the tech issues.
Great. Orders. And we're going to hear from Margaret. Margaret's pronouns are they, them, and Margaret is an American exhibit designer and a museum consultant currently based in Belfast. With a degree in industrial design from the Rhode Island School of Design and over 15 years experience working in the museum field, I think many of you will know and follow their work with great interest. They work at the intersection of design and social justice. This presentation will explore Margaret's recent work with Outburst Arts, exploring queer possibility at the Ulster Museum in Belfast. Thank you for swapping, Margaret.
Sure. Is it okay to pull a mic, or do I have to stand here?
This is the mic here, and as long as you stand in that area and look broadly in that direction, it will pick it up.
I can't use the handheld.
Could you use the handheld if you want? Do we have that? Right? I can click that on if you wish to your scarf. Speak into that and see if it's working.
Testing. That actually, that's amplifying me. Okay, thanks. I feel like such a shrimp behind this little lectern over here. So you may be, let's see, this is not my, I'm using this like it's a remote. So this is the project that I'm working on. This is funded by the Queer Heritage Collections Network. So this is an event. And so you may be familiar with an article that I wrote a couple of years ago, also called Queer Possibility. This is sort of an extension of that work. I see this as coming out of that article, which I'm currently turning into a book, which I'm currently procrastinating on turning into a book. So in that article, I lay out 3 interpretive strategies for interpreting queer history in museums. I call them inferential, descriptive, and imaginative. Inferential is about using contemporary terms to describe people in the past, which I know is contested, but I make some arguments for it. Descriptive is about talking about people's behaviors or lives and describing those behaviors and lives as queer rather than talking about people that way. And this last one is called imaginative. And the reason for that is that so much, of course, as we've been talking about for the past couple of days, a lot of queer history is lost or maybe never was recorded. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for thinking through how to imagine those histories, and to find queer connections in work that may not necessarily be canonically queer. I really liked what David McCalmont said yesterday about creating your own canon. That's really what this is about. This is a quote from the article: "Imaginative queer possibility values queer experience as expertise and gaydar as epistemology." And that's really what this this project that I'm working on is really all about. So this is a little prototype. I've brought a bunch of them here so you can all have one and you can all test it out and let me know. I'm calling it a prototype because that's exactly what it is. Like, we tested it out back in March at the Ulster Museum with Outing the Past. And we've got some good feedback already, but I'd love to hear from you all. So I've got a big stack of them in the back. I wonder if there's anyone who wouldn't mind passing them out, actually. Thank you. I should have given that some thought. And if anyone's following along online, I have a digital version I can send to you. So you just, if you find my email is right on my website, which is probably very poor practice, but I really want you to contact me. So it's margaretmiddleton.com. And if you just email me, I will send you a PDF of this. It does have to go into publication right away. So it's not like amazing timing, but if you're feeling really speedy and want to give me feedback right away this week, I would be really grateful for it. So this is a visitor handbook. This is really, like, I think the most important piece of this for me is that this book is not really for museum professionals. It's really meant for queer visitors. That's not to say that I don't think that museum professionals could get something out of it. I think that it's a really lovely way to think about our expertise as queer professionals, like going into the museum and being led by our feelings and finding places for us to like dig deeper, and uncover queer stories where we just like have a feeling that they must be there, but we don't necessarily have that any other information. So it's like a good starting place, I think, for queer interpretation, but it's really meant as sort of like a guide for visitors, and that's how we're using it at the Ulster Museum. And then there's this, one of my favorite quotes is in this little booklet, which you all now have. Thanks so much for passing it out. For queers, the gesture and its aftermath, the ephemeral trace, matter more than many traditional modes of evidencing lives and politics. And so this is another one of these guiding principles for this work. It's really feelings led. So the result is I'll be publishing this booklet. We'll be launching it at the Ulster Museum in Belfast. And this is done within the Queer Arts Festival called Outburst, which is a Belfast queer staple. And so, yeah, and then the Ulster Museum, if you haven't had the pleasure of visiting yet, it's your pretty typical like encyclopedic museum for the city. It's free to enter, and you can, yeah, it's like where you go on your school field trips and things like that in Belfast. And so it will be a ticketed after hours event. It's £5 for a ticket. It goes through, and it's gone through the Arts Festival. The Ulster Museum also has it on their website, so it's kind of done together, but it's really through the festival. And the reason why I want to make that clear, and I'm going to be like really nuts and bolts about the way I'm talking about this, because I think this is all really integral to the way that I'm approaching it, is that I don't feel that I'm approaching this as like a museum consultant in my usual capacity. I feel like I'm doing this as like an events producer. So I'm kind of more, I'm more working on the Outburst side of things than I am on the museum side of things. And by that, I mean, my goals are this sort of queer for queer product, event, experience that is more aligned with the goals of the Arts Festival, which is queer for queer, as opposed to the Ulster Museum, which is it's very important to them to be for everyone. And this was sort of a moment of tension in our planning process, was about who this was really going to be for. And that's where we came up with this after hours event piece that is separately ticketed and done through the festival. And I think that this is a really great example of the Ulster Museum practicing really good allyship, because they're taking a really hands-off approach. They're giving us the venue, and they are that conduit through which we're receiving the funds. And they are providing us with some staff for the event. And that's it. We're not running anything by them. We're not getting permission from them. And that's all, that's done through this negotiation that we've had. And I think it's been really lovely. So I'm just going to give you a little run through of the 3 artists who I'm working with as part of the other half of this event. So it is a launch of this publication. It is also an arts event where we're going to, we have 3 artists that we've commissioned. Each is receiving £750 as a commission to create new work. It's performance-based, less than 10 minutes each person. I don't know what they're doing yet, and I'm really excited to see what happens. And it's, they'll be responding. They'll pick. I actually don't even know what objects they've picked yet, or galleries that they've picked. They're going to be situated in the galleries. They'll do their performances 2 or 3 times in the evening, and we'll have like a little schedule, and visitors can go and see each one of them in the galleries, responding with their creative queer response to what's on display. So I'll just give you a quick introduction to the 3 artists. I've only just met all 3 of them too, so this is all brand new for me. I moved to Belfast in lockdown 2 years ago, so I really don't know a lot of people yet, and this has been a really nice way for me to get to know the queer arts community. This is Ross and Doherty Anderson, who describes themselves as a wee, fat, queer person who lives in Belfast and makes theatre and cabaret. And so I'll read out to you this quote, even though it's quite long. I just kind of love every bit of it. So, and I feel like this really sums it up. I think rightfully so. We've done a lot of focus, I think, these past 2 days on queer joy. And we went back and forth about the way we wanted to describe this event, whether we wanted to call it a celebration or not. And we really pointedly decided not to call it a celebration, because we wanted to make room for all of the feelings that somebody might have as a queer person in the space of the museum. And I think Ross sums this up really beautifully in their quote. So I'm just going to read it to you. When I imagine queer possibility in the museum, I realize that I have to sit and work with my low-level grief at my queerness, rarely, if ever, being acknowledged, let alone explored in that space. I'm aware that I hold resentment and indeed anger at this particular space. This makes me want to fill the space with as much queerness as possible. Once I follow that thought, I perhaps feel safer to imagine queerness becoming part of the fabric of a museum space that at least teases the semi-permeable membranes of the status quo, if not unpick them a little. So I'm really excited. I have no idea what they're going to do with that, but it'll be cabaret, and it'll be theater, and it'll be queer, and it's going to be big and exciting. So if you're in Belfast on November 13th, definitely come. There's 2 more artists I'm going to introduce you to. How am I doing on time? Oh, I'll be done early. So these are the other 2 artists that I'm working with. This is Carl Hart on the left, Belfast-based boylesque artist and drag king. And Melissa Nicky Aiden Nick Eden, writer and performer from Northern Ireland, working both English and Irish language and researching how language impacts identity. So Carl is working in the drag space. Like if you've hung out at any of the bars in Belfast, they do performances at Maverick a lot. It's like lots of like really thoughtful artistic drag, thinking about gender and politics. And Lisa's work is in, they explore like English and the Irish language. They speak Ulster Irish and working in that like spoken word and poetry. So I think we've got some like really interesting, there's some like really interesting thoughts about like colonialism there that they work through their artwork, which I think is really important and really exciting to have in the Ulster Museum, which can't really currently engage in some of those that work as like a state-funded museum. So I think there's some really interesting opportunities there. I'll just leave you with this quote that's also on the booklet, and maybe this will give us by my leaving early or ending early, this will leave us a chance to talk through some of the booklet together and get your feedback on it. So Audre Lorde, our feelings are our most genuine path to knowledge. Thanks.
What we're going to do is take 10 minutes for questions and then just give you a 5-minute comfort break, but grab your drinks and cookies and extra snacks and bring them back so that we start the next session at 3. Is that okay with everyone? So we've got 10 minutes for questions for Sophie and Margaret in the room and online, and Chris has got the mobile mic and he'll turn that on, and it would be great if you could use that. Who would like to ask either of our speakers a question? I'll start while you're thinking then, and if there's any that come in online. Margaret, I'm really taken again, and this thread keeps coming up. You talked about that idea of a canon and referencing David yesterday. And what I think is so interesting about what you're doing, and it chimes with what we heard from Pagan and others earlier, would be that equipping visitors, not so much museum people, but equipping and empowering visitors to have a different kind of experience, but to have that experience in to kind of re-narrate or curate their own experiences and in spaces that haven't done that. Can you say a little bit more about the sort of what you see of the importance of that independence and that ability to work without the constraints, but still to kind of harness the possibilities of the museum? Because that feels like a live tension in your work.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around your question a little bit. There's a lot in there, and I have a lot of feelings. And like I said, like the project is really about feelings, and I feel like it's also about my feelings. I think that when I work in tell me if I'm answering your question right. When I'm working in the capacity as a museum consultant, I like to be working as holistically as possible, like thinking about like a transformative process where we're like really, looking at how we're approaching interpretation together. And I think that to me, the big difference here is that I feel like I'm more approaching this work as somebody who loves to go to the museum, and not thinking so much as a practitioner, and enjoying that moment of imagination, because I see that more as the role of the visitor and less. Yeah, I mean, I like thinking about this as a starting point, Don Hoskin mentioned permission yesterday, which I think is huge. I mean, that's come up several times in even just in these initial meetings that I've had for this event. And I think that, giving people, even within the museum, I guess, an opportunity to like see queerness where it's not necessarily sanctioned, I think is really exciting.
I love all of that. It's fascinating to see. I think it is a theme, you know, as we're in a museum studies department, so we're often looking at, even though it's kind of a broad understanding of the museum and what that could be, it is nevertheless sort of institutional in that sense. And there seems to be this lovely dance between getting the best out of those things and resisting some of the worst of those things in all the work that we hear. Thank you, Margaret. I've got one for you, Sophie, and it's about the rural, really, which I'm just so sort of fascinated in. We're particular interested in rural at the moment here in the School of Museum Studies, and around social justice issues, I'm always a bit torn or have like kind of different views on it. So we heard from you, Adam, earlier about Norfolk, and you made a statement about a sense, I think, that Norwich might be reasonably trans friendly compared to some other places, and stuff like that just always throws me, really, because I've tended to associate all my experience of doing queer work in metropolitan versus rural areas has been very, very different in terms of the reception for those themes. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on doing this work in a place that is both rural and isolated like Cornwall, and what the sort of challenges or possibilities that presents. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's a really good question, because Cornwall is huge, but it's mainly siloed little pockets. You get kind of groups of towns, and I think it's really hard to say a blanket everywhere has the same response to people. When in Cornwall Pride, we do a bus tour to try and get to as many towns in Cornwall as possible, and the response differs massively. We've turned up at Truro, which is our main city. Well, it's the only city in Cornwall, and the response has been really, really lovely and welcoming. But then you could turn up in somewhere that's just completely off the beaten track that afternoon, and people don't want to get off the bus because they don't feel safe, and we have a buddy system. And I think that's the unique challenge of rurality, is that you can't, it's not homogeneous. It really is, everything is different and every little pocket is different, and you have to be really mindful of that, especially when there are some villages down here where there's maybe 54 residents and things like that. So I think that it's a unique challenge, and you just have to really you can't make assumptions about how Cornwall is like this, because Cornwall is multifaceted and it has many different areas and pockets, and what's believed in Truro and how safe you feel in Truro as a queer person may not be true for how safe you feel in Redruth, for example. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's really mindful of the dangers of sort of generalizing about that. I suppose there's also like rural pockets where there have been havens, there have been people where places where people have been drawn to. I'm less familiar with Cornwall, but I know Devon a little bit better, and I know a few places there where there would be a kind of significant queer population, and that people are drawn to that over time. So thank you, that's really, really good. We've got a question here from Holly in the room, which we'll come to. Are there any online yet, Cesare? No. Okay, we're going to go with Holly. Okay, we'll take Holly first. Go for it.
My question is for Margaret, but I did want to, just while I'm on mic, just say thank you so much to Sophie as well, because I come from a rural area, so that was a very meaningful thing for me to get to see, and just that was really inspiring. Thank you. But Margaret, your talk was really, really exciting, and I love the booklet so much in that it's not a queer trail, right? It's like this toolkit of skill building that they could take anywhere. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about expanding this into either other museums for yourself as like a freelance or a dependent practitioner, being able to do this elsewhere, because it feels like such a fascinating thing that doesn't have to be at Ulster, if you see what I mean. Like, do you have thoughts of expanding its use in the future?
Yeah, so the way that I imagined using this booklet is that you could use it anywhere. In fact, it doesn't work amazingly at the Ulster Museum because they're not super like painting heavy. And I think that this really leads it. Like, I think that for a concrete thinker like me, I think that this booklet really lends itself well to figurative work and work that maybe reminds people of the body a little bit more. So I think that, you know, anywhere where you've got paintings and sculptures is like ideal. We had a great time in the natural history section though too. So it's yeah, I think I would hope that you'd be able to use it anywhere. Oh, and the launch, I mean, it won't even, to be honest, like I don't think that it won't even say Ulster Museum on it. Like it'll just be like a publication that we could definitely do more runs of. And I can imagine there's a possibility, I can't make promises because it's not my organization, but Outburst has floated the idea of potentially having the booklet available for sale on their website. So that I hope that like once everything's all out in the world, like I'll be able to let you all know, check back in and we'll be able to send you one.
Yeah, thank you. We're pretty tight for time. Is there a question online, Cesare? Okay, we'll take one maybe fairly quick question, if that's okay, to give people a chance to get a break. So over to you, Cesare.
Yeah, so got a question from Louise to Margaret. Margaret said that the museum is hands-off in the project, and I wonder if they could say a bit more about, other than being a good ally, how is what the museum does in relating to queer objects and communities going to change or develop? How are the museum going to learn from this experience to be more inclusive if they're not involved other than providing space and funding?
In short, they're not. I mean, they may or may not, but it's not really up to me. This is a really small scope project, and we chose to, instead of focusing on skill building and capacity building for the museum, we chose to focus on the participants at the event. So it's a good question. It would take consulting, and this is a fun art project that we're doing. So, I mean, I hope that everybody who's involved is going to like have a good time and, you know, have a good relationship with queer content in the museum and maybe learn about people who they can work with more in the future. But that's really, it's kind of up to them. Thanks.
Okay, can you join me in thanking both Sophie and Margaret for those brilliant talks?